Skulls are useful because the dead person's soul often stays within the skull. The soul can predict the future and help the sadhu or holy person. People used to do the corpse ritual, Shava Sadhana, and sit on the dead body of a virgin girl. She would then become Kali, and the body would come back to life and talk. My grandfather performed the corpse ritual, but people today are afraid of it. If you make one mistake, you die or you go insane. The sadhu in orange that you see roaming around here in the burning ground did the corpse ritual wrongly, and he was made insane by it. But he will return to sanity one of these days. I feed the skulls on the altar and they help me. I learned the skull feeding ritual from my grandfather. When the skulls are fed, they are pacified and they become protectors. Then they are strong enough to fight off the evil souls who wish to distract or harm the sadhu. When negative spirits, the bhutas and the pretas, try to disturb the sadhu's meditation, then the good souls fight the bad souls and keep the sadhu on the right path. Sadhus often have these helpers. Sometimes the corpse ritual is performed with a woman who is called the highest female practitioner, the Uttara Sadhika. She is very skilled and helps the male through the meditation if he is distracted by bad spirits. When the sadhu draws a circle around himself to protect him from these spirits, she is within the circle, and sometimes the sadhu might invite his guru in subtle form to watch over him and to help. Okay, I'm Mog Morgan, companion of Set and Knights of Shambhala, and this is the Egyptian Magic Podcast. Today I'm turning more towards the Hindu or specifically Tantric side of the mysteries that we tend to explore. Remembering that all of the stuff on the Egyptian Magic Podcast is done from the point of view of a tradition that we call Tankhem. It's a blend of the Egyptian and the Tantric. We spent quite a lot of the broadcasts and a lot of time researching the Tantric connections in Egypt itself. So much so it suggested maybe it was time to return to the Indian version of the material and remind ourselves the sort of things, the common ground that has emerged between them, and to we've done this before in the sort of manifesto that we put together 20 years ago for the Tankhem system, and obviously a lot has happened, and a lot of new research has appeared, and a lot of practical work has been done. So I wanted to sort of bring that up to date and to sort of show what sort of stuff we're looking at and how you might use this in the practice. So we're not going to be able to do that in one broadcast or podcast. It's taken a long time and there's such a lot of material in the project that is developing. So I thought I'd make a start on it anyway. So for the next few broadcasts, we're going to be talking about the topic of Egypt in India, essentially, or Egypt or Egyptian influences within Tantra, which is Tantra is a kind of magical tradition within India that is of most interest, I think, to people, other magicians, and just in general, really. For me, it's the most interesting aspect of the Hindu tradition, but and it was already a very, very interesting tradition. Before I kind of shrink down and show some other pictures, there's a background, a fortuitous thing. I found this megalithic tomb Now, looking at a megalithic tomb like that in the picture, you might assume that that's something from Europe somewhere, from Britain maybe, but strangely enough, as I've written about before, it's actually from India. And India also has this megalithic culture. Not quite as well. It probably goes back as far as the ones in Europe, but it also seems to have lasted longer than other megalithic and Stone Age sort of mystical cultures, which is a point of comparison. Interesting thing about those tombs, even though it looks fairly primitive, they preserve lots of the core ideas of magic in them in terms of orientation, work with the dead. In Tantra, especially the sort of left-hand path Tantra, which means the sort of worship of the goddess, essentially, that we work with, there is this concept of the smarshana, which is usually these days translated as the cremation ground. But the original meaning of smarshana was actually a stone tomb of some sort, something not noted and obvious within Hinduism today, where they tend to cremate their dead and all the rest. But if you go back to the right period, you'll find that stone tombs and burial of the dead are quite important. So that survives within later traditions as the smarshana, as was what they call a cremation ground, although it isn't actually a cremation ground originally. It was a tomb with the dead in there and certain sort of things that lend itself to creative practice. And this has a surprising. This is almost like a universal of magic all over certainly the northern hemisphere. So it seems like when the tantrics talk about meditation in this cremation ground, they're really talking about meditation certainly on the dead, but in the sense of these places, these stone tombs that have remains of the departed ancestors in them and have certain structures. And I thought I'd mention that as it popped up unannounced, as it were. Perhaps one day I'll do a talk on the megalithic culture in India, of which there's an awful lot of material, and is fascinating in its own right, and has this continual existence, and even, as I just said, even has this connection with Tantra. Anyway, so the topic of the meditation on the dead, one way or another, which was the opening quote, which was from June McDaniels, writing about this ritual called the Shava Sadhana in Hindi, which is the kind of meditation or magical practice. A sadhana is more like a full magical practice rather than a simple meditation, although it involves meditation on the dead, Shava. And this is, she's written a whole, certainly lengthy section in her book, which I printed in very small print, which is called Offering Flowers and Feeding Skulls, popular goddess worship in West Bengal, Bengal being a heartland of a particular type of Tantra and worship of Kali especially. And she's written a whole book about that, and it's not all theoretical. She went and met people, and these are kind of actual practitioners, for what we would call folk practitioners, rather than just academics and scholars of one sort, important as they are and all the rest. But these are just ordinary people, and their actual experience of this is much more diverse and similar to the Western adepts in some ways. Probably got more, they've been doing it for longer and have more abilities to do it, but also they have the law on their case, if you like, or people don't like the idea of tantrics, especially in Bengal, which is a very, very left-wing government that doesn't really like religion very much, sees it as superstition that they need to physically clamp down on. Anyway, all that is in that very, very interesting book, which you can borrow in the library or whatever. So as I say, we spent a lot of time exploring Egyptian magic, especially as it relates to what I called Tantra or tantric attitudes within the Near East, and especially within the Egyptian tradition, that are very, very interesting to us. And especially I called it a tantric culture because it has this largely unexplored in lots of ways. I always thought people this gnosis through the body, the kind of connection with bodily things, and that of course includes sexuality, but it's not confined just to this. It's more that the body is this sort of thing that actually has lessons to teach us in terms of higher knowledge and all the rest. So we explored that quite a lot in Egypt. So I think we're turning to India and to look at how those ideas, because the tantric culture comes after the Egyptian one, really, although they're obviously in touch with each other for quite a long time before that. So many occultists have long suspected that Tantrism and Egyptian magic might be intimately connected. I think this is first laid out in the works of an occultist called Kenneth Grant, who's now deceased, but his books are still around and are still fairly popular, quite heavy going in some ways, not always, not in the best sense. Sometimes they're kind of deliberately a bit obscure, I think, but still they're very tantalizing, and they do introduce certain very, very important ideas, including this elaboration of the idea of the Crowley magic somehow connected with Egypt and India especially. He developed a whole mythos about that without really giving the key details around it that enable people to actually do anything with it. They know that he gave this idea and he gave lots of suggestions, but really it's for other people to elaborate this and show how this could be brought back to life, if you like, or in the modern world where certain things are possible. I floated the idea a while ago that these ideas had survived in India when they disappeared in Egypt and the Near East. That's probably not quite right. They probably never completely disappeared, but in the West, but they kind of went through a series of transformations and different groups of people took them over. But certainly there was this kind of point of hiatus that roughly coincides with the rise of Christianity. It actually starts before it, really, the rupture and again the end of Egypt as a coherent civilization rather than just a series of memories. But certainly by the time Christianity became a state religion under the Roman Empire, as with so many things, when the Romans take something on, they always push it to the limit in some ways, and that really is certainly there are laws against the practice of magic and that were enacted under the Roman period, even before the nominal period of the Christian sort of rise. But the other way of looking at it is just to think that the differences between between India and the Near East, Egypt and all the rest, we tend to think of these as very, very separate cultures that are so far apart there couldn't really have been much interchange between them, much influence, although that's obviously been turned out not to be true. These cultures were quite more connected than people realized in terms of physical things, but also in terms of the magical tradition, and I'll give you a few examples of that before we go on to the main subject. Obviously, as I say, things have their ups and downs in Egypt. And in India, well, they had their ups and downs, but for a different reason. It wasn't that things were any culture that's around for 2,000 years, and different people come along, different invasions, and different sort of kingdoms and everything like that. And some of the early kingdoms are very into this, and sometimes they're not so much into this stuff. A good point of contact is a fairly clear example of what we're talking about them being the same culture, essentially, or part of the same late classical, to use a technical term, culture, would be seen in something we're mostly familiar with, which is astrology. Everybody seems to know a bit of astrology. When you were joined the old-fashioned magical orders, it was part of the basic skills that you have to acquire, some sort of knowledge of this sort of material. The astrology we mostly study is from the Greco-Babylonian tradition, which is for us, funny enough, in the West, this is mostly frozen in time, as it was at the time of the Roman Empire, which is another indication that something had broken at that point. So you have all this astrological knowledge and all the rest, but this is 2,000 years ago approximately, but it doesn't really advance very much. The same stuff gets repeated over and over again. So, for instance, the zodiac, which is the most famous manifestation of the of astrology, it's still we still use it in astrology as if it was as the sky looked 2,000 years ago. We haven't kind of moved everything around, and of course, as is well known, the things do move. And strangely enough, in the Indian system, just to give you a little example of, they did change quite a lot. You know, they did carry on researching and adding new ideas, and primarily their zodiac is, as is known, is sidereal. It's based on the actual position of those zodiacal signs which have moved. So if you, as I've done, you know, when I first became involved with, I should say, with the tantric group, East-West Tantric group, which is organized, and I kind of help organize that. And that was part of my claim to have something important to say on this topic, is the fact that I have this long time initiation into this group. Anyway, you the same thing. You have to work with astrology. They published a little book years ago called Tantric Astrology. And one of the things you find, you know, if you've got a sign, you've grown up knowing all right for 10 years or whatever that you were, wherever it might be, a Pisces, suddenly you discover, according to the Indian system, you're not a Pisces anymore. You've actually a totally different sign. You've moved, things have slipped, and you'll now be Aquarius. I'm talking about your sun sign. So that's another story about what effect that might have on you, or whether it's relevant or not, or which one it generates the most accurate results. Anyway, in the Indian system, just to prove to you that the two systems are the same, and it's not the only example, but it's a very good one. So they've got the same zodiac, but obviously in Hindi or Sanskrit, if you like. So Aries is just called Mesha, which is ruled by Mars. Mesha means the sign of the ram. Mesha is a ram. So individuals are known for their courage and energy and pioneering spirit. This is from the Indian tradition. natural leaders driven by desire for adventure and new challenges. So it's fairly kind of, it goes through all of them, all the signs, the Hindi signs of the zodiac: Mesha, Vrishabha, which is Taurus; Mithuna, which is Gemini; Karka, which is the Cancer, sounds like Cancer even, the crab; Simha, or Simba if you like, the lion. Simba, you might know that from the Jungle Book. Simba the lion. It's also the name of Leo in the zodiac. Kanya, the Virgo, often shown looking very, very like the goddess Isis, incidentally. Tula, Libra; Vrishika is Scorpio; Danu is Sagittarius; Makara, actually the sea goat, is a sort of semi-mythological creature. That's the sign for Capricorn. Even now is a little bit strange looking, isn't it? You know, this sort of weird sea creature, goat's head and a kind of curly tail. And Kumbha, Aquarius, the pot, the water bearer, one way or another. I think that's the lot. The one I wanted to, Mina meaning Pisces, the fish ruled by Jupiter, same. And Mina means fish. As in Meena Nath as well, or Matsendra Nath is another version of it, meaning fish. To go back to those, a kind of interesting thing is Gemini, which is Mithuna, which just means with the twins, but Mithuna actually means a couple, usually a male and female couple. Sort of often shown, if you know something about Indian temple architecture, as sort of guardians of the doorway. It just means a couple, so it could potentially be two men, two women, but it's usually a man and a woman is shown, god and goddess, as the guardians of the temple. If I make a variation on that word, make it a bit stronger in sound, which would be the technique, the way the language works, it would be Maithuna. So instead of Mithuna, it becomes Maithuna. Maithuna is a very, very interesting word that occurs within Tantrism. It means a couple, but this time in a much more explicit sexual position with each other. So it's a sexual couple in one way or another. And again, you see images of these over certain ancient Hindu temples, the ones that haven't been worked over too much, but damaged by people who in later times were a little bit uptight about all this sort of stuff. Maithuna, as I say, it begins with M, like Matzah begins with M, and M, there's a practice within Tantrism as well, called the 5 M's, or 5 powerful enjoyments, and those are 2 of them. Maithuna, some sort of physical exchange with each other, and Matzah, which is also quite mysterious because it's fish. It might be a reference to the eating of fish, or the preparation of fish in some way, or something to do with fish. Fish being a very within the orthodox way of looking at this as something a little bit taboo and polluted, which because of the guts and all this sort of stuff. So someone who was a fisherman, you wouldn't expect him to be a holy man or a kind of orthodox holy man, but in fact the founder of the tantric tradition was actually a fisherman in some traditions. He's called Matsendra Nath, and it's possible he had some connection with the sea, perhaps with fishing, with navigation, or it might be that his connection with navigation gave him contacts with the other, with across the sea, with places like Egypt and all the rest. And that is maybe an element of his teachings, but I won't go into that too much. I talked about some of these things in a veiled form in a little book I wrote many even before Tankhem, called sexual magic. No, sexual magic, not sex magic. Sexual magic. It could include sex magic, but sex magic is kind of the technique of using elements of sex to as part of a magical spell. Sexual magic is actually closer to the idea of Tantra. It means that your rituals have a bodily or often sexual connection element to them, to the couple that are working together, or usually is what we're talking about. So it's kind of an emotional physicality to it, not just a kind of mechanistic thing. It means that all of your rites within Tantra are connected with sexuality. Now, this is actually as we mentioned, another point of contact with the Near East and with Egypt is this sexual element, because that, as we've explored in some of the other talks, is the prime metaphor within a technique, you might say, within Egyptian magic is the body, and especially the body as related to sexuality and reproduction. So many images of this, especially in the primary image of the star goddess Nut, who perhaps has a role in Indian sort of mythology as well, that she's very, very manifest within Egyptian temples, and she's always shown naked. She's not always shown. Sometimes she does wear some clothes, but it's very, very common for her to be shown naked and very sort of in your face, sort of sexual, if you like. So I talked as well about a thing called the erotic landscape, which is this thing about how landscapes in the tantric tradition, we're talking about, have this sexual or erotic component to them, which is perhaps a surprising idea. That you could start with the idea of spirited play. Certain places, you're right, certain places have certain special, something special about them within the tantric tradition. This is a very core tantric idea that some physical places have special magic associated with them, which again, it could be like that megalithic tomb is kind of alluding to the same thing. These are kind of representations of the body as well, in some sense. But certainly the spirited place is an elaborate and important science of the spirited place, of places that have spirit within Tantrism. There's a whole esoteric science based around that idea, and you could say this is, who comes first with this, because as I say, it's the same ideas you could say about Egypt, certainly strong here. But there's certain myths within Tantrism and Hindu Tantrism, half a dozen of them maybe, that are, let's say, less than that, 2 or 3, that are the very essence of the tantric tradition, and have coded within them many of the techniques for transcendence, immortality, knowledge, protection, all the different things that you might want, but mostly knowledge is the primary concern. Overcoming ignorance is the primary concern of these tantric traditions in the East. So you've got these core myths, if you like, or descriptions, memories, if you like, that are repeated within the text, and there's always an orthodox interpretation of them, and then there'll be an esoteric, which is the tantric interpretation of them, and this will be probably what most people believe in the end. I'll leave it there for now and continue in part 2 of this video on Tantra and the death posture.